Hello, everybody. I named this episode 12, The Great Divide. And it's part one of a series that today I'm going to share the first four elements of what has turned our country into a powder keg. And it's sad that I'm even having to make this video, but it's something that I feel strongly about. And coming off of episode 11, where I talked and just basically shared about how my silence is something that I've really been upset with myself about, being shy about my faith, being shy about my politics, being shy about everything because it would hurt me. It would hurt my book. It would hurt my movie. It would hurt this and that. And I'm just done with it. And here we are today at a crossroads, though, where we've got people that no longer can disagree. And when they disagree with you, they hate you. And it's gone way beyond that. But I'm calling this first part, The Great Divide, part one, and the first four of 8, I guess, topics that I have, subsets, I should say. Number one is from division to destruction, kind of how we got here, and a little bit of the background. Number two, the birth of rage politics. There's a definite defining time frame where a lot of things coalesced and changed. Obviously, things have gone on for years with politics and the politics of destruction and things like that. But I think over the last 2 decades, things have just gone thermonuclear. And a lot of it's disgusting. It's hateful. It's illegal. And people are dying because of it. The third is the Crosshairs culture. Specifically, how it's happening. And number 4 is the digital gasoline. I think we can all know what that will lead to. But the part 2, though, is basically about the rage of politics in depth. And part 2, I think, is really going to bring it out. And I think it scares me talking about it, and I hope it opens maybe some people's eyes with that. But I want to open this, though, with James 1:19 through 20. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. Because, disagreement used to be patriotic. And I have to tell you, I've got so many notes for this. And because there were so many different ways I wanted to go. And I don't use a teleprompter. I know that a lot of people do teleprompters now, and they look perfect. And that's not going to be me. I just don't feel right doing it. So I do have notes, though, and I'll take a peek at them to remind me of something, because especially like in an episode like this, there's so many different things I want to cue off of and share with you. When did disagreement become dangerous? I don't think that it's something that just happened not at all overnight. It was a drip, drip, drip. It was definitely the frog in the boiling water, starting out with its room temperature water, boom, boom, boom. And then before you know it, you're boiling and you're dead. Well, I'm not saying, that is a metaphor, but I think that's what's happened. It's been drip, drip, dripping for so long, and it's been allowed to happen. All sides are guilty, but there's some differences. There's some major differences in some of the effect and cause of that we're going to go into more in part 2. Social media just totally rewired the whole equation. And we know that the media, they've always said that bloods and bullets or something like that, blood and bullets sells. It's true. Harmony and peace and love and joy and unicorns doesn't sell. And today, though, it's more than just blood and bullets. It's death and anger and hatred and division. It's scary where our country is right now. It really is. But as for the media, it's just the outrage of currency, The courage, I just messed up there, but it's the currency of outrage. I think that's what it means when you talk about blood and bullets, anger, hatred, that sells. So we used to agree to disagree. Who doesn't do that? I shared the story about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, two diversely different folks on the political spectrum. I don't know if they were golfing buddies, but they respected and admired each other, but they couldn't be any more opposed to each other's politics. Today, though, a lot of folks think that if they'll agree with you as long as you're in agreement with their position, and if you're not, they hate you. You're some type of ism. You're a homophobe, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're anti-Semitic, or something like that. Automatically. If you're not towing the line for one way, you are evil. And you're far right, for example. You're not just a wacko. It's just anybody. And the definition now of someone on the radical left or the radical, well, it's come so far towards the middle. It's shocking to know what I just heard on the news today that, and whether you like her or not, but Megyn Kelly, she's pretty staunch conservative and not wacky. There are some right-leaning folks that I would consider on podcasts and things like that they're kind of wacky, not Megyn Kelly. And huge article came out today by some liberal in the media who I would call wacky left, and called her a white nationalist and just went off on her and how dangerous she was for the country. And I'm thinking to myself, that radical, one side saying the far right, it's come so far towards the middle that what do you do with that? We know the media has control over so much. I still wonder how many elections, how many different, state, local, national elections would be changed if the media was right down the middle, reporting fairly and in a balanced manner. But I digress. I was at dinner once where I remember there's one individual that was mocking faith, and I just listened to him. In fact, he'd mentioned my church and said it was a cult. He was a friend of one of my relatives. I did not know him that well. I knew who he was. And I just sat there and I didn't say anything. But he said that my church was a cult. And I wanted to speak up, but what I didn't was I kept silent to keep the peace. And I think that's part of where we are today. One of the problems, I was guilty of that. And I'm not to say I should have caused a scene or anything like that, but I did just shut up to keep the peace, to not cause any friction. And like I said, it used to be friction that used to cause debate around the kitchen table, things like that. And you can go on and eat your dinner, and you wouldn't slam your plate down and say you hated your dad because he didn't agree with you. Every time I softened what I believed, though, the difference between my faith and my voice, it definitely separated. And that's where I've come over the last few episodes. I've really started to see and kind of appreciate where I was. And I'm not going there anymore. I'm not turning away from the fire. I'm head on back into the fire with my faith, with my politics. I'm not apologizing. The apology tour of 15 plus years is over. Not going there. Once you start editing your truth, you stop recognizing what you would call your own voice. Now, I said that outrage pays, and I wrote down here, the algorithm knows it. The louder the argument, the longer we scroll. We're surrounded by voices that agree with us and tone deaf to the ones that don't. I can't tell you how many times on Facebook, though, early on, when I was first on Facebook, I would argue with someone. We're talking when Facebook first came out. And I would get so aggravated because no matter what, and we know this now in hindsight, but you can never win on Facebook, even how profoundly strong your position is or your comment is and, your keyboard skills and things like that. It's just not going to. But we have confused being heard with being agreed with. And I wrote that down because I thought that was pretty wild. Now, I'm going to switch over here because I've seriously got about 20 pages of notes. We can't hear the Spirit if we only listen for our own echo. And the more we surround ourselves with those echoes, the less we hear God's voice. That, to me, is confirmation bias. You confirm your position, right or wrong, based on all those around you that support you, no matter how right or wrong that position is. But it also makes you feel better. Even maybe down inside, maybe there's some dissonance going on there, but you feel, this might not be totally right. But when you got all those people beside you in your corner, how can we fail? Division, though, it's definitely got a body count, because if you think, do you have any friends? Do you have any family members? I mean, I remember last year at the holidays, I think it was around Thanksgiving. I'd heard this more than one time, but there were articles from specifically those on the left saying they don't know how they can be around their relatives at the holidays because they know they voted for Orange Man. And that's usually the language, too. This caricature that they've created since before the man was even elected the first time. He was impeached, by the way, the day after he was elected the first time? I may be wrong on that, but I know that the proceedings they were looking to do it that early. But when we've got to the point where you've got people, and in fact, most recently, now this I'm talking about was last year, but most recently, I read an article regarding Jimmy Kimmel, his wife. You can Google it. She came out and said she was terrified of the holidays. She's terrified of, family. And she's like, I failed. These people, how could they vote for this man? Just going off, having this meltdown about how someone else could feel and really believe that way, as if her way was just, it was, those with that particular persuasion feel that it was their way. There was no other way. See, that's the thing. It wasn't binary. It was just monotone. It's our way. You don't agree with this? You're a bigot. You're a racist. You're a homophobe. You're anti-Semitic, whatever. Well, don't throw that one out there, because a lot of them are anti-Semitic. Now, the birth of rage politics, though, this is where it gets kind of crazy. Proverbs 11:1, the Lord detests the use of dishonest scales, but he delights in accurate weights. Now, I remember this 20-some years ago. It was specifically called the Clinton War Room. It was the Clinton War Room. It was James Carville, Paul Begalia, George Stephanopoulos. Those were the main ones there. There were some other, usual suspects, I suppose, on the left. But, and I know there's 4 words. I'm not even I don't have to take a beat of my notes at all. Politics of personal destruction. That was created in the war room. I think one of their mottos was, it's the economy, stupid, which was good. That was a good motto, by the way, back then for Clinton's first term. But, yep, James Carville, Paul Begalia, George Stephanopoulos pioneered attack politics. Respond fast, control the spin, destroy credibility, no matter what cost. Media adoption. Today, things are a tiny bit different because there are other alternatives, and we've got the internet. But let's face it, 98% of all journalists, or those in the journalism industry, are liberals. Vote left, vote Democrat. It's just a fact. It's not deniable. And you can find studies and go back and look at all the different time periods and say, how many stories on Biden, how many stories on Trump, how many were positive, how many were negative. It's hysterical. It's comical when you've got media outlets today that profess to be, down the middle. And they'll look at you straight in the face. The Jake Tappers and Stelters and Rachel Maddows will tell you, we're going right down the middle. We stick to the truth. I think even people on the left, come on, you know that you've got that faction as basically a part of the DNC. So it's really wild, though. I'm talking about these things right now. And for years, I was terrified about talking about these things. But I'm done. So I'm going to carry on. Now, character assassination was just something that they did. They would come after everyone. It doesn't matter. And see, the thing is, though, on the right, though, it doesn't matter if it was a woman either. Fair game. If you're a conservative, doesn't matter who. The politics of personal destruction knew no bounds, and they created that. Unequal judgment became routine, truth bent to serve the narrative. Now, God detests bias, deception, and double standards. Where are we, though? But politics had basically turned into theater. It's always been that way, I guess. But image replaced integrity. We've been living in that script ever since. So the last 25 years, absolutely, we have done that. And I think that just ratcheted everything up to that thermonuclear level that we, I think, have today. And those folks in the Clinton war room, I think, really did a job of stoking that and pushing it right on through to where I think the Mr. Silky Hand Barack Obama was a master of it too. But all while doing it with a smooth smile on his face. That's what I feel. Fools vent their anger, but the wise quietly hold it back. That's Proverbs 29:11. Targets and takedowns. I printed out a chart here because I'm going to just kind of illustrate. Let's see here. I won't go through all of them. I've got 25 different folks. Michael Flynn, distinguished military man. Legal controversy and media rush to judgment. That was where accusation was not equal to conviction. Brett Kavanaugh, confirmation hearings turned public trial, where emotion was greater than evidence. Even Sarah Palin, mockery overshadowed policy. Humor can wound the truth, no doubt. Here's one that will get everybody up in a stir. Kyle Rittenhouse, trial by media before the court. Speed kills context. He was already judged, and the sentence, many people wanted the sentence to be carried out before it even went to trial because they knew. And we know now that some of the facts regarding that, kid's lucky to be alive, but bring it on. Tucker Carlson, there's another one, tone over content. Allegiances shape perception. Absolutely. So under rage politics, though, I selected here some patterns of rage politics. Selective outrage. Same act, different moral judgment. So you got two people. One's a different political persuasion. Same act, different moral judgment. Emotional amplification. Conflict sells, calm doesn't. Character assassination, identity replaces argument. Omission of context, that's a really big one. Partial truth equal full distortion. Partial truth can be so much worse than an outright lie. And tribal reinforcement, this is huge too. Echo chambers replace empathy. Wow. Truth doesn't shout, it stands. Grace listens before judging, and courage and faith means staying steady in a storm of noise. And, I'll never forget there was a time where Austin came to me, and I don't know, I think we're eating dinner or something like that, or lunch. And what did he say here? He's like, Dad? Okay, I wrote down here, we were watching the evening news. He likes that. He's got some Austin definitely has opinions, but he turned to me and said, "Dad, do Democrats hate us?" He's like, I want to understand, why does everyone look so angry when they're talking to a Republican or a conservative? And I hadn't thought about this, but it just popped into my brain. And I can't remember who said this, but this is one of those little blurbs I hope you remember. That a conservative thinks that liberals are people with bad ideas. A lot of liberals think conservatives are bad people with ideas. Today, that couldn't be more, I think, apropos. I absolutely believe that. But this isn't about parties, it's about hearts, and we're losing a lot of them. We've lost friendships. I know we have. My family. We've lost friendships for sure, absolutely. But where rage exhausts the soul and cynicism numbs it, healing has to start small, with listening, forgiveness, and grace at the dinner table. So, as for a reflection on Austin, though, out of the mouths of children come the questions adults are too proud to ask. Healing must start at the dinner table before it reaches Congress. So, division begins in our own homes. That's exactly where faith has to rebuild. So, the next episode is going to be so much more intense with this one, which is kind of wild, because now that I think about it, I'm going, how can it get more intense? Because I feel pretty passionate about this one. But I've got 3 different ways I want to close this out. So I guess maybe I'll go over all of it. I'll just close it down here. What faith means in a divided world. Faith means remembering that truth isn't a weapon, it is a light. Faith means empathy when the world chooses enemies. Faith means building bridges where culture rewards walls. Faith means choosing conversation over cancellation. Faith calls us to unify what fear divides. Continuing, fools vent their anger, but the wise quietly hold it back. I said that already, Proverbs 29:11, but it's so true. The internet did not make us angry. It made our angry much louder and noticeable, accessible, exposed. True courage online isn't shouting louder. It's choosing silence when silence protects peace. So we've gone from division to destruction, from frustration to fury, but what happens when that outrage becomes organized? When emotion becomes strategy and anger becomes weaponized? That's obviously what we'll explore in episode 13, which is part 2. But let me close with this. The antidote to rage is not silence. It is discernment. Truth doesn't need to shout. It simply stands. Grace listens before judging, and courage and faith means staying steady in a storm of noise. We cannot heal by shouting louder. We may try, but by seeing clearer. In a culture addicted to outrage, choosing restraint is not weakness. It is wisdom. That is Scott's quote. Please, I encourage you to look next week when I'll have the follow-up to this, part 2. I think it'll be considerably more intense, but I think we should all be concerned about these things. And I think everybody should want to talk about these things, because to me, sometimes it just makes me ill, sick to my stomach, especially if it's something that affects you and your family, or, something personally. And you just shake your head and like, my goodness gracious, what in the world just happened? And we know how dangerous things have gotten too. And this isn't an apology, because there's rage and anger. There is on both sides. But the vitriol and the noise level and the hatred, there are a lot of folks on one side that are really, really, really loud. So thank you for tuning in to the Green Pants Podcast. And I'm still Scott LeRette. And I'll see you around. God bless.